Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking about an overhand half swording stab using a katana. So I actually got onto this topic because I saw a fan art of Tomioka Giyuu, the water breathing hashira, and so I'll pop that up right now. And so as you can see, then he's doing the 7th water breathing form, the drop ripple thrust curve, and he's doing it from a half swording position. And so I had a few questions. Is this technique viable? And also I found one fatal flaw that I'll talk about later on. So first let's talk about half swording stabs. It's well known in Western HEMA sword styles for a more accurate strike, a more accurate stab into vulnerable areas, especially with the evolution of plate armor, because plate armor is very invulnerable to bladed weapons. So getting your blade into eye holes or armpits or places where the armor doesn't really cover was really important, because it was pretty much the only way that you could really end your enemy using a sword. And so it was often done using gauntlets or some form of hand protection, because you are holding the sharp edge, and Western swords are generally double-edged when doing this technique. But Scalagrim the YouTuber did actually show that you can grab the sharp edge of a sword barehanded and perform quite powerful strikes with no damage. So he did it using the Mordhouse strike, and he beat the absolute crap out of this car tire, and it was pretty impressive. And he also showed he did it barehanded, no damage to his hands. But if there's any slippage in that, then your hands do get cut. So generally it is done using some form of hand protection. Now the same idea can be applied to the katana for a half swording stab. So you can trade power for accuracy. And so you can basically do it like this. And so rather than moving both hands like the Western stab, you really only need to move one hand, because you have a blunt edge on the bottom of the katana which can ride along your palm. And so you can also do this without any hand protection quite easily, because the katana is not double-edged. So now we get to the question, why is it more accurate? And the error between the hands when they're both on the handle, or at any point really, is generally between 5 to 10 centimeters. And so what that means is that in the stab, then one hand might be slightly higher, slightly lower, to the left, to the right, and it's generally between 5 to 10 centimeters. I was doing it a little bit more than that so that you could see the tip moving, but 5 to 10 centimeters is generally where it's at. And with training, then this can be reduced so you get more accuracy without having to do other techniques. But for the average person without much training, it's about 5 to 10 centimeters. Now, with the two-hand grip, both hands are on the handle. And so if we take my right hand, which is the front hand, as the pivot, the left hand as the back hand to generate power, and then the tip as the damage inflicting point, then we get a lever focusing around my right hand. And so the distance between the hands is about 20 centimeters, and then it's about 70 centimeters from the pivot to the tip. So we can turn that into a fraction of 70 over 20, and then we can multiply that by our 5 to 10 centimeter error, and then we end up with 17.5 to 35 centimeters of error at the tip, which means that for every 5 to 10 centimeters of error between my hands, we have 17.5 to 35 centimeters of error in where our tip goes in hitting our target. And so that's pretty large. Now if you're trying to strike a torso, or even just the general head, then it's quite doable, because you're not going to go out of that frame, you'll still hit it. But if you're trying to hit a vulnerable area, like if you're trying to go up into the armpits or above the sternum, or you're trying to go above the face visor of a Japanese helmet, then that does become quite significant, and you can quite likely miss. So in comes the half swording stab. So if we have a look at this, then now my left hand is the front hand, and it becomes the pivot. My right hand over here becomes the power generator, and the tip is still the damage dealing element. So between my right hand to my left hand, then we have about 60 centimeters. And between my left hand to the tip, we have about 10 centimeters. So now we can make this into a fraction of 10 over 60, and we can multiply that by our same 5 to 10 centimeters error, and we get 0.8 to 1.7 centimeters of error at the tip, which means for every 5 to 10 centimeters of error in between this hand and this hand, we get 0.8 to 1.7 centimeters error at the tip, which is minuscule. Now in reality, then that error is not quite that low because error comes from actually two places. The first is error between the hands, like I said, and the second is also error in body motion, because as my whole body moves, then that creates some error. And so in reality, then you actually end up balancing between power and accuracy, because as you try and throw more power into that strike, your body has to move more. And so then the body error goes up, and so at some point, and that body error completely eliminates all of that accuracy you got from half sorting by eliminating the error between the hands. So it's about finding a sweet spot between body power and momentum generated compared to accuracy. And so this stab actually works really well as a counter for an opponent moving in quite quickly, because you can just do that and their body momentum coming in towards you will add power to the stab. But also, like I said, going through vulnerable areas, you don't need as much power because you're not trying to pierce through bamboo armor or anything like that. You're just trying to go for an open exposed spot where there might be a little bit of cloth or maybe just an open face. And so the power isn't necessarily needed. You still need some power to stab through, but you don't need your whole body thrown into it. Just between the hands plus a little bit of body will be sufficient. So let's talk about the downsides. Main downside, as I've mentioned continuously throughout, is loss of power for accuracy. But there is another downside, which is that the half sorting position is an odd position. So from here, with your normal grip, then you've done this all your life. You know how to go into all of your different stances from it. But from here, then that's a little bit different, because now there's not so much that you can do. Now from here, then some people think that as long as they obey the stab, that they are in the clear, because now there's nothing that the person who's doing the stab can do, and I'm completely at the attacker's mercy. I don't think that's quite right. I think that it's not quite that dramatic, and there's a couple of things that you can do. So there's three things, which, well, it's really two things. Two of them are more or less the same. But from here, then you can go into a half sorting block to the left, and then you can change to a two-handed grip, and you can come through and cut. Same thing for blocking to the top, change to a two-handed grip, come through and cut. Now if they attack from the right, then you can drop it into a right block, change to a two-handed grip, come through with a rising strike. So those techniques actually come from the Sangsudo Korean form, which is the Korean longsword, which was generally done using a nodachi length sword. And because it's so long, it was very hard to maneuver, so half sorting was a viable way to make that length a little bit more manageable. And then these techniques came around. So they are very doable, and they have been practiced since the Joseon dynasty in Korea. Now let's get to that fatal flaw that I was talking about. In the fan art, then Giyuu is holding it as such, with his thumb side facing his opponent. Now I personally think that it should be pinky side facing the opponent, and I'll explain why. So thumb side, then I don't actually see any benefits that, in terms of accuracy, power, or anything really, that can't be gained from the pinky side out. But with the thumb side, then going into the blocks and half sorting blocks is actually quite cumbersome, because your elbow is inwards and down, whereas just turning the hand like that puts your elbow out, gives your shoulder a little bit more range of motion, and it makes those blocks a little bit easier. Now, after scratching my brain for quite some time, then I thought of one possible reason, which is that in terms of forearm armor, it normally laces up on the inner forearm. And so by doing this, with the pinky side out, then more of that inner forearm is exposed. And so then by turning it around, then you have more of that outer forearm exposed, so that it's more protected and it's a little harder to attack. But the main problem with this is that Giyuu isn't wearing any armor at all. He's a demon slayer. His uniform is supposed to be the armor itself. And so, that doesn't really quite work there, but also it's a fan art. But if you guys can think of any reasons why it should be thumb side out rather than pinky side out in terms of the half sorting stab, please let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to hear your opinions. Anyway, I hope that was interesting for you, and with that, I will see you on the next one.